Okay, so I want to talk to you about why having a really good rental agreement, a solid rental agreement, doesn't matter. Okay, now you can have a great tenancy agreement, you can make them sign all the pages, you can do all the things to protect yourself legally, and ultimately you can still lose as a landlord. Now, I am not saying that you shouldn't have a good lease. You absolutely should, because there are times when it can be very helpful. But what I want to let you know is that the lease is ultimately only going to help you in very limited circumstances. So let me give you an example. You can have a solid lease with a tenant, and the tenant decides not to pay. So you have, obviously in the lease, you have certain provisions for, giving them late notices, giving them fees, ultimately evictions and things like that. So you start to go through that process, and you wave the lease in their face and say, hey, by the way, you've breached your lease. This could be for anything. It could be for pets. It could be for smoking on the property. It could be for anything, right? It doesn't matter. But you can tell them, hey, this is what your lease says. And they say, don't care. And so you go, all right, I'm going to take you to court. Well, how long does it take to go to court? It can take 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 12 weeks to take someone to court. And then you can get a judgment from the judge. Now, you got to be careful, because if they're smart as a tenant, they can bring in other consumer advocates, they can bring in certain groups that can help them, can say, well, there's a misunderstanding or whatever, and then gets postponed. But even if the tenant gets the judgment against them, you've lost 1, 2, 3 months of rent just going through this process. And then to get them out, it costs you more money and more time, because you can't just kick them out in one day. The judge gives them a certain amount of time to get out. And then depending on where you live, there's other laws about how you evict a tenant. Like in Columbus, Ohio, where I've done work, you have to have the sheriff come and do it. Then you have to have people that you hire to come and take their stuff out. You have to put it on the curb. If they leave anything behind, you've got other issues with storage and so on. But my point is the lease is really only there, in my opinion, it's there to help you work well with your tenant. It's there to give them some parameters, but ultimately, if you're relying on your lease to help you, you're going to fall short if a tenant doesn't want to listen. And so I just choose to have great relationships with my tenants. I choose to look at ways that I can benefit them to give them a good experience. And my lease is really just a backup in front of the judge. My lease is not there to manage my tenant with. And so many landlords make this mistake because they say, well, I've got a lease and here are the rules and you need to follow them. And if you don't, then I'm going to evict you. Well, that's just really a negative way of doing it. And I get it, right? I get it, because you're thinking, well, but it's my property, here are the rules they signed up. It doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. Ultimately, the law is going to be on the tenant's side most of the time. And you as a landlord have everything to lose, because every day that the property is not tenanted or you're not receiving rent, you're missing out on money. And the minute you start waiving the lease in front of the tenant and claiming that you're right and they're wrong, even if you are, right, you're putting them in a hostile situation where they can damage your property or cause you other problems. So again, I'm not saying you shouldn't have a good lease, but I'm saying don't rely on it. Don't think that people are going to respect the lease and follow it in the same way that you are. It's much more important to find a good, amicable way to deal with tenants. And if you are going to run into problems with a tenant, the best way to deal with their eviction is to never put them through eviction at all. The best way is to look for cash for keys or some other process that gets them out very quickly with minimal or no damage to your property, where they take all their stuff out. Because if you can do that, ultimately you will actually succeed a lot more than if you try and go by the book or by the lease. And so again, for those of you that are starting out in rental property or inexperienced, just take it from me. The lease is okay, it's good, but it's not going to solve your problems if you run into a tenant that just doesn't want to abide by it. And when you go through all the legal channels, that's not going to matter, because ultimately the cost is still going to be borne on your side, even if you're right. So look for ways to work well with your tenants and find a good middle ground, have a good relationship, because that's going to go so much further than what you have on paper. Hope this helped. See you next time.